Good morning, everybody. This is our last lecture. I can't believe it. It's been a wonderful course, or at least for me, it's been great. This is the second year that I have taught this course alongside Jeff, who makes this whole thing enterprise work, along with our amazing three TAs. And the course is an evolving thing, and I think that after this year it'll evolve again. The world is changing quickly, and I always want this course to keep up with things. So, I'm going to wrap up today, sort of go over some of the things we've learned. I want to talk about the emerging economic models. And this is so important because how we treat our economy or how we view our economy is the source of problems, but it's also the solution to problems. And so I'm going to leave us with some thoughts about that. And I'll spend the first hour of this lecture talking about these things. And then in the last half hour, we'll just wrap everything up and talk about the final exam. Um, so these are the things I want to talk about today. You can look at these. I'm going to talk about go back to the Gaia theory and complex systems theory where we started in this course. And then I'm going to talk about, also the things we've been talking about, how our climatic system is under a lot of stress and, where it's led us or where it's leading us. And then I've talked a lot about solutions, natural solutions to climate change. I want to go back to those things, especially with respect to forest stewardship. And then talk about how we really need to change our economic system in order to really implement these things. And that some of the ideas that are out there, which I think are incredible, and so, we need to really, motivate these along because they provide solutions. Um, and then talk about the course at the end, about the exam. Okay, so I've shown you this slide at the beginning of the course, and let's just come back to it because, this is a theory that was presented by Dr. James Lovelock, who was an astrophysicist, and his colleague, Dr. Lynn Margulis, who is a microbiologist. And they, together came up with the Gaia theory, which has been, discussed a lot, disparaged a lot, but it's come around to, it is actually a very relevant way of looking at where we live on Mother Earth. That the Earth is really a system of feedback loops, and that stabilizes our global system. It results in homeostasis. When something grows, it feedbacks to limit the growth. Really, it brings it into some kind of adaptive cycle. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the feedbacks are really important to keep things in a homeostasis, in equilibrium, in balance. There are many processes happening on Earth that do these, what people do, what trees do, what oceans do. All of these systems level things interact with each other to create this stability. As an example, biomass, the production of forests, for example, they sequester carbon, they balance out the atmospheric greenhouse gases, and they make the planet hospitable with adequate or, pretty stable, if you will, stable equilibrium surface temperatures, ocean salinity can be stable. And of course, we all know these things are destabilizing now, but the Earth is constantly in this feedback loop that creates balance. It supports life and life supports Earth. This has been really incorporated into complex adaptive systems theory, which we've talked about in this course, which was first conceived of and written more formally by Donella Meadows. And actually this is the way people have thought for a long time. It's this indigenous way of thinking as well, that the Earth is a system. It's a system of many connections, and these connections and linkages create a global system through their interactions. And this model, this is actually from a paper that I encourage you to read. It's actually by a scientist or a thinker, philosopher who lives in British Columbia. His name is well, there's several authors, but Ty Homer Dixon is one of the main authors, who I was fortunate to meet. And in this paper, which I hope you read, it talks about how our this system, you can think of it as Gaia, this system of interactions between things like economy and the environment, health and the environment, social governance and the environment in our case, and the economy. All of these linkages provide exchanges of information, feedbacks to each other. Um, uh, and this is what creates this balance, this Gaia system. So it really is formalized in this complex adaptive systems thinking of connection and then feedback loops and adaptation based on these feedbacks. But this is, sorry, this is a bit fuzzy. This is actually not how our economic system is currently modeled. And this is where, we found ourselves in this period of climate change. And it's because our economic system is not based on these more holistic distributed interactions, these feedback loops. And let me explain this a little bit. And I encourage you actually to look at this TED Talk by an economist out of the UK, and her name is Kate Rayworth. And she gives very easy to listen to TED Talk. And she talks about economic growth and how it's gotten us where we are, and also how to solve the problem. So this lecture today is going to be talking I'm going to follow along her line of thinking here. So our economic growth model, which we've all heard, we're all very familiar with this. It dominates our economies. We measure economic growth through something called gross domestic product. And it really was a model that was developed by Adam Smith over local economies, and then really formalized in thinking by this this economist, I'm trying to read his name. I can't speak. Oh, here we go. W. Rastow, sorry. And he says that there's, this economic growth model, which is this model of infinite growth, which it's kind of like, and Kate talks about this, it's like a plane taking off into the atmosphere, a plane that actually never lands. And it's got sort of these 5 stages of growth. And Rastow talks about how countries all over the world have been kind of categorized and evaluated on where they are in stages of growth. And they talk about this as a natural evolution. This is not just theoretical. This is actually how we're running our societies now. But the idea is that in stages of economic growth, there's at the beginning, there is kind of like these traditional knowledge systems. We've heard a lot about traditional knowledge systems in this course from Dr. Teresa Ryan, Dr. Gary Merkel, and how these knowledge systems have very sophisticated governance systems. They're based on knowing the feedbacks between environment and society. They honor these feedbacks, and that, to create abundance, you have to know your system, know when the salmon is spawning, know when it's time to not fish, know how to count and be responsive to the changes in the populations. We've learned about this in this course. But these traditional societies were heavily looked down upon during colonial periods, and in this, when this model was developed in the 1960s, and really developed the 5 stages of growth. The first one was this traditional, that the nation's gross domestic product, it's where its growth is at, where its economy at, is really limited by its traditional knowledge systems. That it's a limited period, limited technologies, limited institutions, and limited mindset. That's exactly what they thought. I mean, I want all of us to reflect on, after going through this course, is that really true? And I hope you come away with going, no, this is not true at all, that there's a highly sophisticated way of knowing and seeing the world that is based on balance. Anyway, in the GDP, in the growth model, that's considered primitive and traditional. And then, as the economy is taking off, it creates the preconditions for growth. And these are where you have the beginnings of a banking system, where you're having the beginnings of mechanization, so moving away from, basically working in the land with your hands and your heart to getting machines to do it. The belief, that the system is based, that growth is necessary, that you've got to keep growing in order. That's when we're starting to get out of this traditional primitive economy into so-called primitive economy, into the growth economy. And then, when the country is taking off, that's where, like a plane taking off is where these banks start to create something called compound interest rates. And that the banks create more wealth based on interest. And that, this interest then, basically builds on itself. And this builds the economic institutions. It's growing and growing. And then the next phase of growth, the fourth, is that it drives these systems towards industrialization. That countries can, even if they don't have resources, they can industrialize and create wealth, by making things, which is true, but also through this compound interest rates, which actually ends up accumulating wealth in the system and in a very top tier. There's kind of like there's where it lands is in this top tier of affluence. Um, and then the mature society is where the plane has really taken off and it sustains itself through mass consumption. That we're sustaining, we're up in the air and we're consuming and we're buying stuff, and that's what sustains a mature economy. Then you're in the G20, if you will. But the problem with this model is that there is no limit. In theory, the idea is there's no limit to growth, but we know that there is a limit to growth. Ecological systems have limits. The Gaia theory, and also the Donnell Meadows complex adaptive system theory says there's feedbacks that constrain growth, that keep things in balance. Part of the model that Kate Raworth, and this is from Kate's talk, she says part of this model of being in the fifth stage, which is like, unlimited consumption, and that's what keeps the plane in the air, is that the idea is that we take from the land, we make stuff, we use stuff, and then we throw it away, and then we cycle back and we make more stuff. We use that stuff and then we throw it away. It's kind of like the throwaway economy. And this is what's creating this unlimited growth, our consumption. And you can easily see, based on this course, that's led us to climate change and global change, right? This constant use of resources and not putting it back into the system, not recycling it back into the system, not regenerating the system, but taking and exploiting too much has led us to a lot of problems like global change. And just to remind us again, back to the forest, this course has been about forests and the cycle of the forest. It really is a cyclical thing, right? And we talked about succession earlier in the course and how, you have a disturbance in a young stand, maybe you have a fire, the forest starts to grow up. It becomes mature. You start to get sort of like small scale disturbances in these coastal forests. Eventually that forest, as it grows old, it becomes an old growth forest. Gaps open up. You get much more complexity, more biodiversity. You have continuing small scale disturbances like on the right. And then these beautiful old growth forests are, they're highly complex, highly desirable, sort of attractors in our landscape. They represent maturity. And of course, they're undergoing constant disturbance. And then there might be some major disturbance that comes along and resets the whole thing back to a young forest. And in that succession, there is a cycle going on. There's a cycling of carbon, of sequestration, release, and then sequestration again, release, and so on. Nutrients, the same thing. Water is in a constant cycle. We're talking about these water cycles. So the forest is a cycle. It shows us it's a cycle. It's not in constant eternal growth. It cycles. And scientists, complex adaptive systems theory has kind of illustrated this in something called an adaptive cycle, and I've got the image down here. And I think it fits. It's a nice symbol of what's going on here. Is that you have, this early successional stage as a stage of release. This R means release, and then there's open resources, and then there's growth. So we've got the growing part of the cycle, which goes up to K, and here we are in the growing part of the cycle. And then it sort of reaches the maximum productivity, which is called conservation. That's where all, resources are sort of all encaptured in this in this mature forest. And then the forest starts to open up a little bit. Some trees die, they reach the end of their lifespan, and you get this thing called a release, this release. So that's up here in this third block of the succession model where you're starting, some trees are dying, you release the understory, and they come up and they grow up. And this is when biodiversity itself is really, you know, is really enhanced in this structural diversity. And then the system kind of reorganizes itself. It cycles back on itself, and you start getting more regeneration in the understory as more trees die. And then you might get another large disturbance like a fire or a major wind event, but there's a lot of regeneration, a lot of seed, there's a lot of spores there. The old is still there, and they're going to push forward the new. And so we get a reorganization of the system, and you go through this cycle again. It's very cyclical, and there's a lot of feedbacks. This is a natural way a forest works. It doesn't go on growing forever and ever and ever. And of course, in forestry, we try to do that by growing the forest to its maximum growth rate, cutting it down and setting it back on this growth stage, this constant growth stage. And we, staying in these parts of succession, staying in this R and K part, and never letting the system cycle back and grow to its old age. In climate change, nature-based solutions says you need to let these cycles carry out themselves to create these feedbacks, to create balance. And this keeping it in this constant growth stage, which matches with the economic system, right? Constant growth. It depletes the system in places that we have not understood until now, until recently, as we see climate changing, too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, systems starting to collapse. And it's not like our planet hasn't been through big changes in the past. We have, and this figure just goes through over many millions of years ago. We've been going through dramatic changes, but over long, long periods of time, when first life on Earth started to change the atmosphere. So this is oxygen in the atmosphere along the y-axis, and you can see, the first prokaryotic and the photosynthetic bacteria, and they emerge onto the land, and leading to the evolution of the eukaryotic cells and higher level organisms, and of course photosynthetic plants and trees, which photosynthesize and generate oxygen. And that's where we started to see massive changes, threshold changes, if you will, in oxygen level, which led to, these great evolution of giant flying insects. And then something happened. And we think that it was perhaps a meteor hitting the Earth, and there was a great drop in oxygen levels, and then, evolution again. And so, through time, there have been these threshold points where we get a non-linear change, where you get a sudden change. And so here we have a threshold change through the evolution of eukaryotic cells. We have a collapse period here through this, this event, and then evolution again. So these are all threshold changes that have happened in the past. We do have it in our history. But now we are in another threshold change, and it's because of human, the Anthropocene, what we're doing. And these changes are very rapid. So this is CO2 levels over time. I've shown you this before. Yes, there's a lot of changes, including threshold changes over time. But now we're in this unprecedented rapid change. And so the question is, yes, it's a threshold because it's a big change and it's causing system level changes, but it's also, is it a tipping point? And tipping points are different than thresholds. Tipping points are where you can have irreversible changes, where it's really hard to get back to where you were once you tip over into that area. Um, and the IPCC, it defines a tipping point as a critical threshold. So it is a threshold, but it's a point, it's a special threshold beyond which the system starts to reorganize itself. It can be abrupt and irreversible. It can be brought on by small scale disturbances that, thinking about our system and its linkages, and you start to have ripple effects through all these linkages. It may be small at first, but then as they ripple through the whole system, you start to get a large change to that whole Gaia system. And so we're seeing that, expressed on our land. And I've shown you this cup and ball model in this course, where we can think of system stability as a cup, where the depth of the cup is equivalent to the resistance or the resilience, if you will, of the system, the ability to rebound. But that we can change the shape of that cup, right? By, lowering or making it more shallow, more easy for the state of our system, which is the ball, to flip out into a whole new different regime. And the way in this picture here we're doing that is that this is actually Grand Forks watershed, is through clear-cut logging, which is the red blotches on this map. We've actually changed the nature or changed the shape of our stability of the cup itself. We've created conditions where we don't have these photosynthetic organisms, trees and plants on the landscape, because we've removed them all, to fit with our economic growth model, grow, grow, grow. We've removed the trees, and it's created conditions for flooding because the soils can't handle it. We did this all of a sudden, and we flipped the system. And it's here expressed in this little town of Grand Forks, where, it reached a threshold or a tipping point where the town flooded, and now it's at risk of continuous flooding over time because of the changing, this massive change to the landscape that surrounds that little town. Okay, so that's an example of where we really are tipping things over. And I'm going to get into these economic models in a minute, but I just want to just bring home, like we've talked about this a lot in this course, of not wanting to get to this point, what the IPCC says as 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperature, to where we can't get back on our feet, where we've hit a tipping point, and it's really hard once we've hit that to recover. That we have to put more effort into recovery. And if we don't, that once we hit that tipping point, we can have a runaway state where it gets worse and worse. We don't want to get to that point. So we're getting there. We're almost there. They say the threshold is 1.5 degree Celsius increase. We're hovering around that now. We don't want to reach 450 parts per million CO2. We're at 420. We don't want to hit 450. So what do we do about this, right? This is actually going to require transformative change away from our economic growth model, which is driving consumption of forests and mining and overfishing and grow, grow, grow. And the consequences are dire, as I said. I want to bring back this word that you're going to hear, and you're going to say, I never heard that word collapse in Suzanne's course. But here it is. This is what is meant. When you hit these tipping points, you have systems collapse. And this is the irreversible breakdown of a structure and function of an ecosystem, where the ecosystem loses its defining features and is no longer able to sustain itself. And I've got some pictures down here of tropical systems and temperate forest systems where they have hit that collapse point, where they won't be able to, or it's going to take a lot of input to help it recover. Yes, so this is a collapse system. We're in a totally different, we've changed the cup over here. We've flipped it into these different stages we've hit tipping points and into collapse systems. Our systems have not quite collapsed yet. People talk about them heading towards collapse. I think what I want to arrest here is we need to work hard not to let that happen. Um, People talk about, not just collapse of a system, but of polycrisis, where many systems collapse all at once. And people think, there's talk that we're in a polycrisis where our economic systems are collapsing, our ecological systems are collapsing. We have social inequality, we've got wars happening, we had a pandemic. There's signs there, but I want to leave you with that we have a robust system and we have robust societies, and we do not have to allow this to happen. Okay, and I urge you again to read this paper when you have time. And I'm not going to test you on these papers, but they're just really good as, emerging scholars that you are, that you come out knowing what these things and read what these things are. So back to this idea of collapse, the Stockholm Resilience Alliance, which is, based out of Sweden, which has studied these systems and how how they work and then how they collapse. And they've been reporting on, and you've probably seen this before, these kinds of figures where we can describe planetary boundaries, and that is, how a system, when it exceeds those planetary boundaries with respect to those systems, then we're in a crisis. And so here it's saying, and I know this is not detailed enough, but each one of these parts of this circle with different shades are considered planetary boundaries. And these things include food security, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political violence, social equity, gender equity, housing, networks, energy, water. And so what the United Nations and other people have been talking about is whether or not thresholds have been exceeded, those 9 boundaries within which, so really we want to stay within a healthy system so that all of those services are being met. And what people are estimating is that we're actually exceeding them in various ways. And so here in 2009, 7 boundaries were assessed, 3 were crossed. 2015, 7 boundaries assessed, 4 crossed. 2023, 9 boundaries assessed, 6 crossed. Okay, so that just means that, we're exceeding the planetary ability to absorb the things that we are doing as human beings. And Kate Raworth in her has said, we cannot exceed these. We know that we cannot exceed these. But we also need our needs met. We need our human needs and non-human relation needs met. And the earth provides for that. Like Gary Merkel said in his lecture, the earth is to create, it's to support life. It's there to support life, right? And Kate says there is actually a sweet spot, and she calls this the donut economic model, that there's a sweet spot shaped like a donut where we're not exceeding the planetary boundaries. So these ones here, I was describing the ones that we need for humans to thrive. The 12 that she describes are inside this donut, the ones that we need, and we cannot exceed the ones on the outside, which are the 9 planetary boundaries: climate change, ocean acidification. Let's see, what is, I can't, chemical pollution. So she's showing, we can't exceed these, but we also need to provide for ourselves so that we can survive. So she's saying this is the sweet spot where we want to be. It's not a growth model. It's a balance model, right? It's about creating balance in the world of not taking too much, but having enough to thrive. This is, all the talk that Teresa talked, Dr. Ryan, Dr. Merkel, Dr. Holt talked about, even, and Dr. Alila, myself, we've all been talking about, creating balance, living within this balance system. The forest tells us to do that too. It goes through these succession models to keep things in balance. Okay, so um, it's and like I said, we kind of haven't been doing that, right? We've been on this economic growth model, and this cartoon, I think, captures it really well. We forgot about the systems. We got so focused on the trees and what we can make from the trees, like to grow our economy, we forgot that we living within a system that requires that we live in balance with the system. Um, okay. So just getting back to Kate Raworth's donut economic model, just to say again, there's a safe and just space for humanity. And she calls it a regenerative and distributive local economy. So it's not excessive growth, and it's not, concentrating that growth wealth into the pockets of a few. It's within limits that we, can thrive, and we need to distribute that wealth globally so that all of us thrive. And so having our needs met, health, food, water, energy, education, equality, political voice, peace and justice, all of these things are our needs. We can't, exist if we're short on these things, but we also cannot overshoot, as she's saying, by taking too much. Okay, I think it's a really good model, and it reflects the values of local and indigenous people. So I talked about earlier how Kate had the model of the current growth model is take, make, use, and then throw it away, and then start over, take more, and keep taking. She's saying we need to turn this on itself so that we're actually reusing stuff, recycling. If it needs to be replaced, then we recycle it and we create over again. Or in our forests, we don't just keep taking from it, take a forest every 40 years, go back, take again, take again, take again till we deplete it. We actually need to let them regenerate. Same with our agriculture systems, our fishery systems, all of our natural systems, so that they're regenerative forests, regenerative agriculture, regenerative economic systems. And I wanted to, leave you with another reading, if you have time. I'm not going to test you on any of this, but Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I've quoted a number of times in this book, in this course, and talked about the honorable harvest, about never taking more than you need, never taking the first, and never taking the last, giving a gift back in a gift economy. And she really goes into, in this new book she has, which is a very, I've got it right here. Sorry, I guess you can't see it because I can't see it. It's got my background. Anyway, it's a beautiful book. And she talks about it from a very human perspective, what Kate's trying to say in her big economic models, but she says it in a really beautiful way through the story of the serviceberry. So the serviceberry is just the Saskatoon berry. It's actually blooming right now. It comes out first in spring in the interior. It's the first shrub to flower, these beautiful white flowers. It was blooming when my first daughter was born, actually. And it's incredible because it blooms in great abundance, and it creates berries in great abundance. And these berries are distributed, and it feeds all the birds and the animals, but many of the berries just drop to the ground and recycle back to the earth and then feed the plant again. And the next spring it blooms in great abundance again. Never expecting something back, right? And it's a great metaphor for, how to create abundance in this world and gift it out and then receive the gift of life back again. So I'm just going to read to you from this book, just the front cover. It's just a description of the book, and it's only 100 pages long. It's like you can read it in an hour or two. So it reads here. An Indigenous scientist, Robin Wall Kimmerer, harvests serviceberries alongside the birds. She considers the ethic of reciprocity that lies at the heart of the gift economy. How, she asks, can we learn from indigenous wisdom and the plant world to reimagine what we value the most? Our economy, this growth economy, is rooted in scarcity. That we take so much, we make it scarce. And it's based on competition that, as though it's a zero-sum game, that if I get more, you get less. And the hoarding of resources, what she's talking about here is like the hoarding of money and resources in the top 1% or, a few people. And in doing that, this growth economy, we have surrendered our values to a system that actively harms us. It harms what we love. Meanwhile, the service-berry relationship with the natural world is an embodiment of the interconnectedness and gratitude. The tree redistributes its wealth, its abundance of sweet, juicy berries, to meet the needs of its natural community. The birds eat the fruit, they distribute the fruit, and in the process they get the food and carry the pollen of the plant to further distances, and that helps the plant in its reproduction as well. But it's not this constant tit for tat. It is a gift economy. And this distribution ensures its own survival, then. As Kimmerer explains, the serviceberry shows us another model, one based on reciprocity rather than accumulation, where wealth and security come from the quality of our relationships, not from the illusion of self-sufficiency or constantly consuming. So I invite you to read that book. And what she's talking about, and what Kate Ratworth is talking about, what Samantha Power and her co-author Seefeld are talking about, is that we need to move then from this growth model, which is a degenerative kind of economy that's gotten us into so much trouble with climate change, which is about taking too much, to a regenerative economy where we use less and we recycle more, that we regenerate the earth rather than take too much from the earth. This is where we need to move in our economic models. And really, when the IPCC comes up with, its nature-based solutions, this is about giving back, right? It's about never taking too much. So if we look here at how we treat the land use, the land, water, and food, what are the key things we need to do? Well, one is reduce consumption. That means reduce conversion of our natural ecosystems, reduce clear cutting of old growth forests. Do we really need to take all that wood? And then most of it is wasted anyway. In a forest that's an old growth forest that's harvested, only about a quarter of it ends up as some kind of product. The rest of it is left on the landing and the forest is gone. So reducing, right? Not taking too much. And then restoring our agriculture systems, our forest ecosystems, our damaged ecosystems. So we need to get to work and restore these systems, bring them back up, bring them so that they're back in that thriving part of our economy, not the taking part of our economy. And then moving down here, all of this is all about, living in balance, sustainable, healthy diets. It's sustainable forest management, sustainable agriculture, using less, recycling more. IPC is encompassing and integrating all of these values in what it says saying are our best shot at solving climate change. And just bringing it home, more closely to what our forests in British Columbia, and this is what I left you with when I was showing you the research from the Mother Tree Project. How do we actually do this on the ground here in British Columbia at home, at our home? One is to return the land to the people and get it away from the 1%, the corporate, oversight, and bring it home, right? So that we can look after these forests, so that we can live in these forests and care for them and know the cycles and regenerate them. Protect what we have left, like I said, and Dr. Holt said, we only have 2 to 3% of our really tall treed old growth ecosystems left. We've taken so much. We've got to stop doing that. We need to protect what's left of our old and primary forests that have never been logged before. And we need to reduce, right? Reduce the forest harvesting and avoid any land use conversions. We cannot keep on this constant growth model. The land cannot sustain it. When we do, harvest to improve forest management, so we're leaving legacies behind. We're leaving old things behind. The seeds, the spores, the soil food web, the organic matter needs to be left behind for the next generations to regenerate the forest. To restore the forests. Again, these are all aligning with the IPCC recommendations. What we're finding, we need to restore the vast industrialized landscape that we have left from the last 60 years of exploitation. This is a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of ingenuity and a lot of know-how and people getting out there and doing this work and innovating and doing the research and figuring out how to do this. And at the same time, because we've kind of created a hotter environment, we need to reduce risks of loss, risk to wildfire, risk to flooding, risk to greater loss. These are all good things. These are all the things that line up with the IPCC's nature-based solutions. And I gave you this example of the Cheakamus community forest where they actually put into action, what if we don't take everything? And instead we harvest less and we actually value something more than just timber. We actually value carbon, in this case, carbon pools. Carbon pools are really just an expression of life, of regeneration, right? Carbon, all the plants and trees and the soils, are at least 50% carbon, and it grows when they regenerate, and it stabilizes our climate. What if we valued that instead of just taking the timber? And when we actually enter that into the economy and value carbon as something real and tangible and life-giving, that in the current model, we show that if we just take a little bit, we only harvest like the second growth forest, not the primary forest, not the old growth forest, but the second growth forest, and we value carbon, we actually earn more, even in today's current climate, than we do by just harvesting the forest and selling it the timber. And what if we just take a little bit, if we do partial retention, we leave all the old trees behind. We leave the 60% of the old trees behind. We don't take the biggest and the best. We leave the grandmothers and the grandparents there to regenerate the next generation. It's actually worth more, far more, even in today's current carbon and timber climate, the value that we're placing on things, it's worth 3 times as much as if we took everything. And of course, this also depends on whether when we do this and we emit CO2 to the atmosphere that we pay for that, right? We tax it. That brings it all into a more balanced economic outcome as well. Okay, so how are we going to do all this, right? We've built our economy based on growth, on exploitation of timber resources, and we've got money concentrated in the top tier, in the banks, in the wealthy people, the top 1%, and that money is sitting there, and it's not coming back down to the people who are doing the work on the ground. And there are new financial model systems out there that align with Kate Raworth's model that says, let's cycle that. Let's get that money cycling around so that it's actually getting in the hands of people who are doing that regenerative work, right? The regenerative communities, the land stewards, people who own the land or who are the stewards of the land, the farmers, the indigenous people, the people that are actually regenerating the earth. They need the resources to do that, right? To regrow the forests, regrow the wetlands, regrow the peat bogs, regrow the fish stocks. So we need to move money from up here, which is in the crown of this tree, down into the roots where the action is. And so there are emerging these bioregional financial facilities globally around the world that moves that money, that says, okay, we're going to get that money and we're going to get, you're not going to make killer returns. You're still going to make returns on your investment, but we're going to get that money and cycle it down into the land where it's needed. And so these these BFFs, if you will, are emerging all over the world, in the Amazon, in the Cascadia region, in Europe, and they're starting to work. And I want to give you a lot of hope and find out about this. Go read this book, Bioregional Financing Facilities, and figure out how it works and get involved if you can. So Cascadia, the salmon forest, the salmon nation, which we've talked about in this course, is one of those places where this is happening, where there's investments being made in restoring the forests, and saving the old growth forests and returning the land to the people. And they have, and there are certain principles, and you can look at this. I'm not going to talk about, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but let's just say that it's about decentralizing financial governance so that you're moving money from the top tier down into people doing the work. These bioregional financing facilities look for projects, if you're working on salmon and regenerating forests and regenerative agriculture, it puts them together to create synergies. And then together, the wealth is being distributed to those who are doing the synergistic work together and catalyzing this regenerative economy. There are certain principles. They align with living systems principles, right? Not infinite growth, but cycles. Gaia aligns with indigenous wisdom. Those things go together. It serves regeneration, right? Not infinite growth and exploitation. It's inclusive, and it has inclusive and participatory governance systems that are representing the bioregion in which they work. It works to shift power imbalances. It's transparent and it enables participation. It leverages capital from up here and puts it down here. It treats growth not as an end or a goal, but as a means to get somewhere. It finds funders. And there are these, funders, especially, the heirs of the great wealth, people that have, or in corporations that have generated great wealth from exploitation. The heirs of that wealth are actually involved in this, and they're redistributing wealth. And they're aggregating all of their abilities together. They're working together, and they're engaging in partnerships, in citizen science. They're engaging in people like you. So I encourage you to find out about these things. This is how we're going to regenerate our Earth, bring down our CO2, and restore biodiversity. And so we'll take a little break, but before we do, I just want to end with this one little story. I was actually in the Amazon rainforest a couple of years ago, and I met this man. He's a shaman. His name is Minari, and he's of the Sapara Nation. The Sapara Nation is a very small nation in the Amazon. And when I was down there, there was an election going on. Ecuador actually had quite a very brutal election at that time. This was in Ecuador. And also it was at a time when there were a lot of electoral things going on. Brazil was changing its, over from Bolsonaro to a more social government. And the leaders of the Amazon at that time were all getting together and looking at the shape of the Amazon rainforest, which was undergoing, there's big changes, right? The water system, the hydrologic system is showing signs of it's shaking a bit. There's worries of collapse. Because of the global climate change and exploitation of the rainforest. And these global leaders got together and they said, what are we going to do, right? What are we going to do for our people? And at the same time, some of the great shamans of the Amazon basin also got together. And Minari was one of those shamans. And they got together to try to understand what are they going to tell their people, how to move forward. And he told, he was telling us, what they told their people. And, so there's really kind of about four things. One of them is that, yeah, we're going through a lot of change, to acknowledge that this is real, not to put our heads in the sand, that we're undergoing massive change. And it's, and it's not going to be easy. And that there's going to be losses. However, the second point was that we actually have everything here. to solve the problems. We have our networks, we have our systems, we have our Gaia system, right? We have balances and feedbacks, and that our system is resilient, that all of these interactions, these cross-scale interactions between economy and environment and health and social well-being, all of those linkages are there. And they're robust. And so and we have, in the forest sense, we have the roots, we have the seeds, we have the spores, we have the organic matter. We have it all here. Um, and and the third message was that, given that we're undergoing change, yes, we do have everything we need, that there are actually these systems emerging all over the world. The ones that I just talked to you about, these bioregional financing facilities, for example, Kate Raworth's donut model, microfinancing in Africa. There are all these grassroots financial systems emerging and being put to work by people on the ground, all over the Amazon rainforest, all over North America, all over Africa, all over, Asia. They're hidden, right? They're not out there being big and flashy, but they're operating. And they're doing their good work, and it's working, right? It's working. And so, they encourage their people to get involved because it takes people to make these things work, to invest in these good yourself in these good things to help solve climate change. And they said that, the fourth thing is that we're going to do this, right? We're going to solve it. It's not going to be easy, but there's immense hope here, but hope, as Jane Goodall says, hope is not just like, Pollyanna thinking. It's actually hope is having a vision and putting work into it to make it work. And we have this happening all over the world. And so I'm going to leave you with this message of get involved. Right? This course has been all about forest stewardship in a changing climate. Now about forests, what needs to be done, and now we need to put it to work. So I'll leave that with you with Minari's message to all of us is that we can do this. And then let's take a little break and I'll come back and talk about the exam. Okay, so let's just go over what's going to be on the final exam, which I know you're all anxious about. The final exam is on April the 25th at 11 a.m. Is that correct, Jeff?
No, it's 23rd.
Okay, sorry.
From 33rd from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's on April 23rd from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So sorry. I totally screwed that up, but
Uh,
okay. April 23rd. All right, all day long. So what are we gonna cover? We're gonna cover all of these lectures that have got a star beside them. So basically all of the lectures since the midterm, including Dr. Alila's water cycle and all through to today, including today. Okay. That's a lot. There's 14 lectures in total in here. For the guest lectures, so that's Dr. Alila's, Dr. Ryan's, Dr. Merkel, and Dr. Holt. The only questions that will be asked are those that were already given to you in lecture in the question or the polling questions that were asked. So just know the answers to those questions, and that's really what you need to know for those lectures. For all of my lectures, whatever was said in the lecture or on the slides is, will be examined upon. None of the readings, any extra things that I mentioned, like, oh, you should read this paper or you should watch this video. None of that will be included on the exam. Those are just for you to expand your knowledge base. So it's really just what was on those lecture slides that will be included of my lectures in the exam. So just to reiterate then, all the guest lectures, it's only the polling questions that were already presented to you in the class. And for my lectures, it's only the materials that was on the actual slides themselves. None of the extra video links or readings will be included. Okay, so just to go back over what the course objectives were, and just to take a check and whether we actually covered this stuff, um, just as a kind of a review. These are the things I wanted to do with you. I think that we succeeded to understand the fundamentals of a forest ecosystem, um, including disturbance and succession. We did that. We talked about soils and the biogeochemical cycles. That just means the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and we did all of that. We spent a lot of time talking about habitat and biodiversity. You know, what does that mean? How do species work together? Um, to understand forests as complex adaptive systems. They're not static things, right? They're not just a cluster of things, a collection of things. They're a collection of relationships between like the trees and the animals, the soil and the water and the air. It's really a collection of relationships. And these relationships is what out of it emerges the incredible properties of a forest or an ecosystem. Its ability to cycle water, its ability to cycle carbon, its ability to be homes for biodiversity, for people, to provide for us to thrive in abundance in the world. Um, to understand how, Westerners view forests and how Indigenous people view forests, and to make your own evaluations. But, there are different ways of seeing, there are different ontologies, ways of knowing, and ways of viewing the world, the epistemologies. And, the one is more holistic than the other. And which is, and I've tried to, really present to you in this class, that holistic way of seeing the world is really what we need to embrace in order to treat our ecosystems well and to thrive, help them thrive, help ourselves thrive. Learn about traditional forest management practices, where they can go awry and how we can fix those and how we can restore our ecosystems. So we did that. To learn about the state of the forest today, to state how forests are contributing to trends in global change, and then discuss ways of restoration and conservation that includes Indigenous knowing. It includes Western ways of knowing, Western science. It includes understanding the carbon cycle, biodiversity, and all the other values. So I think we did all of these things in this course, and I hope you walk away with a good round understanding of the absolutely crucial role of forests and forest-related associated ecosystems and how we treat them in our global cycles. Okay, so the final exam, then here we are in how we've been grading this course. The final exam is worth 40%. That's quite a bit. You need to pass the final in order to, or at least you have to take the final. You don't have to pass it, but you need to take the final in order to pass the course. So let's see. The final is not cumulative. So like I said, it's everything since the midterm, starting with Dr. Alila's lecture on water. Just like in the midterm, it will be online using lockdown browser. And if you need any special accommodations as before, as you know, you can contact Jeff and I. Okay. And so this is going to be how we're going to ask the questions. There's going to be 20 multiple choice questions, 20 true false questions, 6 fill in the blank. But instead of you choosing your fill in the blank, we're going to give you a drop down menu to choose from. 2 definitions and 2 short answers. So it's basically the same structure as the midterm. It's just that the fill in the blank will be using drop down menus. And that's it. So I would say if you go back through your lectures, understand the learning objectives, follow the study guide, which I'm going to be posting online in the next day or two. You'll do well in this course. You'll do well on the exam. So, okay, Jeff, I can see you want to say something.
Yeah, so for the April 25th on 11 a.m. using lecture Zoom link is for the final exam review session.
Right. Sorry. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's 2 different times, just like
2 different things.
Yeah.
I've made things confusing.
No. Yeah, I will also send out an announcement for like include all of the information, so no worries. Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. So just to clarify again, the exam is on the 23rd of April.
Yeah.
It's open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's going to be on using online lockdown browser. Then we're going to have a review session on April the 25th, and we're going to go over the answers to the questions. And that's at 11 a.m. April 25th.
Yeah. And it's not mandatory to attend in the
Yeah.
yeah previous session.
Yeah, absolutely not mandatory. That's only if you had questions.
Right.
Um, okay. Is there some questions here? I don't know.
Yeah. Suzanne, maybe you can go over the Juliana stuff, Juliana questions. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so Juliana, thank you for your question. First way to get involved, use ecosia.org as your search web. Download extension for Google Chrome so that it automatically becomes your search browser. And as your Safari search engine, search Safari on your iPhone. Ecosia is like Google, but instead of using profits to CEOs, they use 100% profits towards reforestation and climate action. Excellent. Thank you, Juliana. These are the kinds of little things that happen that are really important. Um, Juliana, it'd be awesome if you guys could send an announcement about this. There are 1,200 students in this class, and it means 1,200 students using this browser could bring thousands of dollars to climate action every year. Okay, excellent. We will do this. We will make an announcement on Canvas. Thank you. Thank you, Juliana. Yeah, next question was, are we required, okay, to join Zoom? No.
Yeah. I
You don't have to join the Zoom review on the 25th. I think that was what that was about. How harsh will the right answers be for the definition? We need to be memorizing the exact words, or can we explain in general ways with our own words and understanding? The answer is the latter. You can use your own reasoning and rationale, but keep the answers short. Just, we have 1,200 exams to mark, and so keeping it short and to the point is always good. How long is the final? 2 hours? Yeah, it's 2 hours. It's at 3:30 p.m. April 23rd, right? Okay, it's between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. You can use your 2 hour, you choose your 2 hours within that 12-hour period to write your exam. Yes, and the review session is after the final. It's on the 25th at 11 a.m. using the regular Zoom lecture link. Yeah, I think that's it then.
yeah.
Great.
So just clarify. So the review session is not for helping you prepare the exam, but uh clarifying about the answer about the final exam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The review session comes after the exam, so it's really just to go over the answers.
Right.
Are we supposed to reach out to the TAs if we have any issues with the browser? They're extremely unstable on Windows for ARM. I mean, lockdown browser.
So if you have any lockdown browser issue, just reach out, just email me, or if you encounter any issue during the exam, then join the Zoom. We will have the window and you can come here for help. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I think you guys, I wish I knew you all. It's kind of weird teaching online, but I've enjoyed teaching this course. I hope you've enjoyed the course too. It's always an evolving thing. But if you like the course, you can recommend it to other students for next year. We'll be here teaching it again. And yeah, thank you for being with us for this last 4 months. Oh, wow.
Yeah, we done that.
We did it. Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Suzanne.
All right.
Yeah. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Yeah.